The first crack in Maeve Black's heart came not with a scream, but with a whisper, one she overheard from her own husband. "She's holding me back," Rowan Black said into his phone, his voice low but laced with resentment. He didn't know Maeve was in the hallway, her hands still damp from washing the dinner dishes, her breath caught somewhere between her lungs and her throat. It wasn't the words that stung most, it was the cold certainty in his tone. The way he spoke about her as though she were an obstacle, not a partner. For 7 years, Maeve had lived in quiet devotion. She traded the glittering chaos of boardrooms for bake sales, couture for clearance racks. She tended to a modest garden, volunteered at the local library, and cooked every meal from scratch in their small kitchen in Dom, a sleepy suburb of Boston. Her days were humble, predictable, and until recently, full of love. Or at least she thought they were. Rowan had been the center of her universe. Handsome, ambitious, and blessed with a natural charm, he worked as a mid-level financial analyst downtown. To his colleagues, he was a man on the rise, but to Maeve, he was the man she believed had chosen her for her soul, not her status. He often lamented his bad luck in life, how with more capital and better connections, he could run this city. Maeve listened patiently, never letting him suspect the truth. She could have written him a check large enough to buy the skyline he dreamed about. Because Maeve Black was not who she claimed to be. She wasn't the orphan from a forgotten corner of Massachusetts. She was Maeve Vanderbilt, the sole heir to Vancorp, a sprawling conglomerate worth over $200 billion, with holdings in technology, real estate, and energy. The world knew the Vanderbilt name, but Maeve had hidden hers. She'd met Rowan in her final year at Harvard, studying art history under an assumed name to escape the suffocating expectations of her billionaire family. Her parents, Richard and Eleanor Vanderbilt, had died in a private jet crash when she was 18, leaving her in the care of her formidable grandmother, Augusta Vanderbilt. Overwhelmed by loss and the crushing weight of her inheritance, Maeve longed for anonymity. She wanted a love untangled from the knots of wealth and influence. Rowan had seemed like a dream, a scholarship student with passion in his eyes, who spoke to her like she was a person, not a portfolio. When he proposed a modest life together, away from the relentless glare of high society, Maeve agreed with relief. She locked her entire fortune in a blind trust, accessible only through her family's lawyer, Jasper Flint, and told Rowan she had nothing but her heart to give. For years, she believed she'd made the right choice. They built a life filled with little rituals, coffee together in the mornings, long walks in the park on Sundays, handwritten notes tucked into lunch bags. Rowan seemed content until he wasn't. The change began subtly. He complained about her outdated clothes, about how they couldn't afford the vacations his colleagues bragged about. He'd compare her to the wives of his friends, women dripping in diamonds, wearing gowns worth more than their homes. "Did you see the ring on David Chen's fiancée?" he'd remark after work events. "Must be 10 carats. Her father's a shipping magnate in Singapore." Then his eyes would drop to Maeve's simple gold band, and his lips would curl, just slightly. Still, Maeve loved him. She convinced herself it was stress, that once his career took off, they'd be happy again. But the bitterness in his voice grew sharper, the gaps in their connection wider. Then came the day she overheard him on the phone. "She's holding me back," he repeated, his tone laced with contempt. "If I had someone with real connections, I could be running deals worth millions." Maeve stood frozen in the hallway, her mind buzzing. He didn't know that the someone he wanted was the woman standing 10 feet away. He didn't know that every bill paid, every home-cooked meal, every ounce of stability in his life had been supported by a woman who could have bought and sold the entire firm he worked for. That night, she sat on the edge of their bed, watching Rowan sleep. Moonlight traced the curve of his jaw, the same face she had once cupped in her hands, believing she had found her forever. But now she saw him differently. She saw the ambition that had once drawn her to him, twisting into greed. The love that had once felt safe turning into something brittle and transactional. By morning, she decided she would not confront him. Not yet. She needed to be sure. Over the next weeks she watched him more closely, noticed the long, networking dinners, the subtle scent of expensive perfume that wasn't hers on his shirts. She counted the lies, small, casual ones about where he'd been, who he'd met, lies that slipped off his tongue like second nature. Then one Friday he came home late, his tie askew, his hair smelling faintly of jasmine and champagne. "Big night," he said with a smirk. "Closed a deal. You wouldn't understand." Maeve smiled faintly, not because she didn't understand, but because she understood more than he could ever imagine. That night, while Rowan slept, she opened her laptop and sent a secure message to Jasper Flint. She hadn't contacted her family's lawyer in 7 years, but the subject line was clear: activate protocol. Jasper's reply came within minutes. Understood. Do you wish to proceed fully? Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. Once she replied, there would be no going back. But the image of Rowan leaning into his phone, speaking about her like a weight around his neck, burned in her mind. Yes, she typed. Prepare everything. The next morning, she poured Rowan's coffee, listened to him talk about a coworker's lavish engagement party, and tucked away her fury behind a calm smile. He didn't notice the subtle shift in her eyes, the way she measured each word before she spoke, because Maeve wasn't just his wife anymore. She was a woman preparing for war, and the man across the table had no idea the empire he craved was already hers to command. In less than a month, he would find out. The first time Maeve saw them together was a Tuesday evening in early spring. The air still carried the chill of winter, but the city's streets were alive with the hum of rush hour. She had just finished volunteering at the library when she spotted Rowan across the street, standing outside an upscale wine bar. He wasn't alone. The woman was striking, long dark hair spilling over the shoulders of a camel-colored coat, red lipstick that caught the glow of the street lamps. She leaned in close as Rowan spoke, laughing in a way that made her tilt her head back, her hand grazing his arm. Maeve stopped walking. She could have told herself it was a client, a work friend. But the way Rowan looked at her, eyes locked, smile soft, was not the way a man looked at a colleague. Maeve turned before they could see her, walking quickly in the opposite direction. Her heart wasn't pounding from shock. She had suspected. No. What she felt now was something colder, the confirmation she needed. That night, while Rowan was working late, she sat at their small dining table with her laptop, combing through public records. The woman's name was Elise Porter. She worked as a junior associate at a boutique investment firm, the kind that thrived on high-profile connections. Her online photos showed her at charity galas, rooftop parties, always with a glass of champagne in hand. Maeve noted the details, saving them in a private file. The next day, she made her first move. Over tea at a quiet cafe, she met with Jasper Flint. The lawyer had aged in the years since she'd last seen him, but his eyes were as sharp as ever. "I want the trust ready," she told him. "All of it. Liquid, if necessary." Jasper leaned back in his chair. "That will create ripples, Maeve. A withdrawal of that size, someone will notice." "Let them," she said calmly. "By the time anyone understands, it will be too late." Jasper studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "And Rowan? He doesn't know yet. He won't until I'm ready." For the next 2 weeks, Maeve lived a double life. To Rowan, she was still the dutiful wife, cooking, smiling, asking about his day. In reality, she was assembling a team. She quietly reached out to her family's old contacts, a PR strategist who owed her grandmother a favor, a discreet private investigator, a security consultant who once worked for Vancorp. She told each of them only what they needed to know. The investigator returned with photographs within days. Rowan and Elise at a hotel lobby. Rowan brushing hair from her face, Elise slipping her hand into his as they walked to a car. Each image was time-stamped, each one a nail in the coffin of their marriage. Maeve didn't cry. She didn't even feel anger in the way she once had. It was as if her emotions had crystallized into something hard and precise. Every photo went into the file. Every text message she intercepted through the investigator's legal methods was documented, cataloged, stored in both digital and physical form. The real blow came on a Friday night. Rowan had told her he was at a networking dinner. In truth, he was at the Argent, a rooftop restaurant famous for its panoramic city views and even more famous for its waiting list. Elise was with him. The PR strategist Maeve had hired was already there, seated at the bar with a clear view. The strategist's phone camera captured the moment Rowan presented Elise with a small velvet box. The ring inside glittered under the warm restaurant lights, large enough to catch the attention of every nearby diner. Elise's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide in mock surprise. Rowan slipped the ring onto her finger, oblivious to the fact that every angle of the scene was being recorded. The strategist sent the video to Maeve within minutes. She watched it once, then again. Her hands didn't tremble. If anything, they steadied. This wasn't just infidelity anymore. This was public. And soon it would be public on her terms. The next morning, over breakfast, Rowan acted as though nothing had happened. He talked about his plans for the weekend, about a possible promotion at work. Maeve nodded in all the right places, sipping her coffee, hiding the faintest curl of a smile behind the rim of her mug. By Monday, she had the trust funds transferred into new accounts under her full control. Jasper handled the legal complexity, ensuring every move was airtight. At the same time, the PR strategist began seeding subtle rumors through social circles, whispers of a major acquisition, a Vanderbilt name quietly re-emerging in the business press. Rowan didn't notice. He was too busy basking in his secret romance, too convinced of his own cleverness. One evening, Maeve overheard him on the phone again. This time he was speaking to Elise. "She's comfortable," he said. "She has no ambition. She'd never survive in my world. You, though, you understand power." Maeve closed her eyes, letting the words settle into the steel she was forging inside herself. The following week, Elise made her own mistake. She posted a photo on social media, a champagne glass, the city skyline in the background, and Rowan's unmistakable watch in the frame. The photo was quickly deleted, but not before the investigator archived it, another piece for the file. With her evidence stacked and her resources in place, Maeve was ready for the next step. But she knew patience was her greatest weapon. Every day she kept quiet was another day. Rowan walked deeper into the trap. It was a Thursday afternoon when she received the call that would accelerate everything. It came from an old acquaintance in Boston's philanthropic circuit. "Maeve, I hear you're coming to the Whitmore Gala next month. I can't wait to see you." Maeve hadn't planned to attend. The Whitmore Gala was one of the city's most exclusive events, a magnet for the wealthy and ambitious. But now she saw its potential. Rowan had always dreamed of being invited, but he'd never made the list. Elise, however, would give anything to be seen there. "Of course," Maeve replied smoothly. "I'll be there." She hung up the phone and sat in silence for a long moment. The gala would be the perfect stage. By then, her reemergence as a Vanderbilt would be in motion. By then, the right people would know exactly who she was, and exactly who Rowan had discarded. She imagined walking into that ballroom, the chandeliers blazing, conversations halting as faces turned toward her. Elise's smile faltering, Rowan's expression shifting from confusion to dawning horror. It was almost time. But first, she needed to make sure that when Rowan fell, he wouldn't just lose her, he'd lose everything. The weeks leading up to the Whitmore Gala unfolded like a chess game only Maeve knew she was playing. Each move was deliberate, each step calculated to set Rowan up for a fall he would never see coming. Her first move was to secure allies. Jasper introduced her to two board members of Vancorp who had always respected her parents. One controlled significant shares in the company's energy sector, the other in its tech division. Over a discreet lunch at a private club, Maeve explained her plan. Not the personal betrayal, but the business angle. "A leadership shakeup is coming," she told them. "I intend to be ready when it does." Both men agreed to support her. Her second move was financial. She quietly invested in a series of strategic acquisitions through holding companies registered under different names. Rowan didn't know it, but the rumors he was hearing at work about mysterious investors buying up assets in his industry all led back to her. The very ground beneath his career was shifting, and he was too busy taking Elise to dinner to notice. At home, she played her role perfectly. She asked about his day, laughed at the right moments, and even cooked his favorite meals. It was a performance that would have fooled anyone except the performer herself. Behind the calm smile, she was memorizing his habits, noting every lie, every absence, every financial transaction he tried to hide. The private investigator uncovered something Maeve had suspected but hadn't confirmed. Rowan had opened a separate bank account. It wasn't much, yet, but the deposits were suspiciously timed with his client meetings. Maeve didn't confront him. She simply added the bank statements to her growing file. Then came the first ripple. One Thursday, Rowan came home later than usual, irritation written across his face. "Somebody's been sniffing around the office," he said, tossing his briefcase onto the couch. "Asking questions about me, about my future plans. Do you know anything about that?" Maeve didn't look up from the book in her hands. "Why would I?" she asked, her tone mild. He studied her for a moment, as if trying to read something beneath her calm. "Just weird timing, that's all." She offered a small smile. "Maybe someone's finally noticing all your hard work." If he heard the faint trace of irony in her voice, he didn't comment. The next week, Maeve made a subtle but crucial adjustment. She moved the majority of her personal belongings, including heirlooms and irreplaceable documents, into a secure storage facility under her legal name, Maeve Vanderbilt. Rowan didn't notice. What he did notice, however, was her appearance changing. She began wearing tailored dresses again, subtle but undeniably expensive. Jewelry that had been locked away for years now glinted at her wrists and neck. When he asked about it, she shrugged. "I thought I'd refresh my wardrobe for the gala." "The gala?" His brow furrowed. "What gala?" "The Whitmore Gala," she said, sipping her tea as if it were the most ordinary thing in the world. "I've been invited." He stared at her, incredulous. "That's impossible. Those people don't even know who you are." Her lips curved into a soft, unreadable smile. "You'd be surprised who remembers me." From that moment, Rowan's curiosity turned into something sharper. He began asking more questions about her friends, her schedule, even her phone calls. But Maeve had been raised in the Vanderbilt world. She knew how to guard her secrets. Every answer she gave was truthful enough to sound convincing, yet vague enough to reveal nothing. Meanwhile, Elise was making her own preparations for the gala. The investigator reported she'd been telling friends she expected Rowan to propose to her officially soon, claiming he was going to leave his wife after the event. Maeve saved those voice messages too. As the date drew closer, the PR strategist executed the final phase of Maeve's public reemergence. Articles began appearing in business columns about an influential heiress returning to the corporate stage. The pieces didn't name her outright, but they hinted heavily, citing her education, her family history, and her role in upcoming acquisitions. It was enough to spark speculation among Boston's elite. One night, just a week before the gala, Rowan came home unusually early. He stood in the doorway of their bedroom, watching her as she organized papers into a sleek leather folder. "You've been different lately," he said finally. Maeve looked up, her expression open. "Different how?" "More confident. Dressed up, busy with things you don't talk about." She tilted her head. "Isn't that what you wanted? Someone with ambition?" The question hung between them, sharper than either of them expected. Rowan opened his mouth, then closed it again. "Just don't forget who's always been here for you," he said, the words carrying more warning than reassurance. When he left the room, Maeve allowed herself a single deep breath. He was starting to feel it. The shift in balance, the change in control. But he still had no idea how far it had gone. On the morning of the gala, Maeve stood before her mirror, the final dress she had chosen draped over the chair. It was a custom piece, designed for her by a friend in Paris, elegant, commanding, and impossible to ignore. She fastened a diamond necklace at her throat, one that had belonged to her grandmother. Her phone buzzed. It was Jasper. "Everything's in place. Tonight's the night." She sent a single reply. "Make sure the photographers are ready." By evening, the ballroom of the Whitmore Hotel would glitter with Boston's most powerful. Elise would be there, expecting a proposal. Rowan would be there, expecting admiration. And Maeve would be there to deliver something else entirely. Because once the lights hit her, there would be no going back. The Whitmore Hotel's grand ballroom glowed under crystal chandeliers, the air alive with the hum of Boston's elite. Silk gowns swept across polished marble, the scent of roses and expensive perfume mingling in the air. Waiters glided between clusters of conversation, balancing trays of champagne flutes that caught the light like tiny suns. Rowan stood near the entrance with Elise at his side, looking around as though he'd finally arrived where he belonged. Elise wore a champagne-colored gown with a slit that caught more than a few stares, her hand curled possessively around his arm. She leaned in and whispered, "You'll introduce me to the Whitmores tonight, won't you?" Rowan smirked. Just stay close. They'll know who we are soon enough. What he didn't know was that the Whitmores already knew exactly who was coming, and it wasn't him. The room stirred when the doors opened. A hush fell so suddenly it was almost audible, like the orchestra had missed a beat. Maeve stepped inside. She wore deep emerald silk that hugged her figure with an elegance money couldn't fake. The diamond necklace at her throat caught the chandelier light, scattering it across the room like a constellation. Her hair was swept into a polished chignon, a single diamond pin glinting just above her ear. Every step she took seemed to part the crowd without effort. And she wasn't alone. Beside her walked James Whittaker, chairman of Whittaker Holdings, one of Boston's most powerful financiers, and a close friend of her late father. Maeve smiled as she moved through the crowd, her arm looped through James's. Conversations broke off mid-sentence. Eyes followed her. Whispers rippled through the room. Rowan's smirk faltered. He blinked, as if unsure his eyes were telling him the truth. Elise's fingers tightened on his arm. Who is that? He didn't answer. James led Maeve toward the center of the ballroom. The Whitmore hosts themselves greeted her warmly, as though she were an old friend. Glasses clinked. A photographer's flash went off. Then another. Within minutes, the room's unspoken hierarchy had shifted. Maeve was no longer the quiet wife no one noticed. She was the guest everyone wanted to be seen with. Rowan's pulse kicked up. He recognized that necklace. He had once asked about it years ago, and Maeve had told him it was a family heirloom, nothing valuable. Now he was beginning to understand just how much he'd been kept in the dark. When James excused himself to speak with the mayor, Maeve found herself face to face with her husband. "Maeve," he said, voice low, his smile tight. "What are you doing here?" Her gaze swept over him with cool precision. "Enjoying the evening." Elise shifted uncomfortably beside him. "You didn't say your wife was invited." Maeve's eyes met hers, steady and unreadable. "You must be, Elise. I've heard so much about you." Elise's lips parted, then closed again. Something about Maeve's tone, polite but edged like cut glass, left her without a rehearsed line. Before Rowan could recover, the Whitmore matriarch approached, looping her arm through Maeve's. "Darling, they're ready for you." "For me?" Rowan echoed, confusion flashing in his eyes. "Yes," Mrs. Whitmore said, glancing at him briefly before turning back to Maeve. "The keynote. We were thrilled when you agreed to speak. The Vanderbilt name means so much to our cause." Rowan went still. Elise's head snapped toward him, but his eyes were locked on Maeve. "Vanderbilt?" he repeated, the word slow, as if trying it on for size. Maeve's smile was flawless. "I suppose it's time you knew, Rowan." The next 20 minutes were a master class in quiet power. Maeve took the stage, speaking effortlessly about philanthropy, innovation, and the importance of strategic investment in Boston's future. Her voice was steady, her posture regal, her presence magnetic. The crowd hung on every word. Cameras flashed. Every influential figure in the room now knew her name, and by extension, knew exactly who Rowan had been married to all along. From his spot near the back, Rowan felt a sick twist in his stomach. Elise's grip on his arm had gone slack. Her eyes darted around the room, registering the shift in how people looked at them, or rather, didn't look at them at all. They were invisible now, and Maeve was the center of gravity. When the speech ended, applause thundered through the ballroom. Maeve descended the stage to a flurry of handshakes and business card exchanges. Rowan tried to intercept her, but James Whittaker was already at her side again, guiding her toward a circle of CEOs and politicians. By the time Rowan caught up, she was mid-conversation with the governor. He touched her elbow lightly. "We need to talk." Her eyes flicked to him, cool and distant. "Do we?" "Yes," he hissed, leaning in. "What the hell was that? Vanderbilt? Since when?" She interrupted with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Since before I met you, but you never asked, did you?" He opened his mouth, but she was already turning away, greeting another guest as though he didn't exist. Elise tugged at his arm. "Rowan, you didn't tell me she was—" "Quiet," he snapped, the weight of the evening pressing on him like a vice. Across the room, Maeve accepted another glass of champagne. Her diamond necklace caught the light again, and she could feel Rowan's gaze burning into her back. But she didn't turn around. Not yet, because tonight wasn't about confrontation. It was about planting the seed. And Rowan was already beginning to realize that whatever game he thought he was playing, He was hopelessly outmatched. And this was only the opening move. The Whitmore Gala ended in a blur of glittering conversation, clinking glasses, and discreet business deals. Maeve left before midnight, not because she was tired, but because she knew Rowan would follow. That was the point. Sure enough, 15 minutes after she stepped into her waiting car, his black sedan pulled up behind her at the gates of their suburban home. She could see him in the rearview mirror, jaw tight, shoulders tense, moving with the restless energy of a man whose world had tilted in ways he couldn't control. She was already in the kitchen when the front door slammed. "Maeve," his voice carried down the hallway, sharp enough to startle the cat off the counter. "In here," she called, her tone maddeningly calm. He appeared in the doorway, still in his tuxedo, tie loosened, eyes blazing. What the hell was that tonight? She tilted her head slightly, as though searching for clarity. "You'll have to be more specific." "Don't play games with me," he snapped. "Vanderbilt? You've been a Vanderbilt this whole time? Do you have any idea how that makes me look? 7 years, Maeve. 7 years I've been chasing opportunities, struggling while I what?" She interrupted, her voice even but edged. "Lived the life you claimed you wanted, supported you, stayed quiet when you complained about everything we didn't have, knowing full well I could have given you all of it?" He froze, thrown off by the precision of her words. "You lied to me." She let out a short, humorless laugh. "No, Rowan, I didn't lie. You never asked. You were too busy talking about what you wanted to see to notice what was right in front of you." He took a step closer, lowering his voice as though the neighbors might hear. "You should have told me. I could have." "Used it?" she cut in, eyes locking on his. "Paraded me around for connections, taking credit for deals you didn't make, spent until there was nothing left." His mouth opened, then shut again. For the first time she saw hesitation in his eyes. "Maeve, I'm your husband. We're supposed to share everything." Her smile was sharp. "Funny, you didn't share a lease with me." The color drained from his face. "That's not what this is about." "Oh, it's exactly what this is about," she said, her voice soft but lethal. "You thought I was harmless, a quiet little wife who'd never know better, never expect more. And because you thought that, you let yourself believe you could have both, me at home and her on your arm." He took another step forward, the air between them taut as a wire. "You're twisting this. A lease means—" "Careful," she warned, her gaze unflinching. "You're about to say something you can't take back." For a moment, the kitchen was silent, except for the ticking clock on the wall. Rowan's eyes searched hers, looking for some trace of the woman he'd known, the one who'd listen, forgive, and smooth over his mistakes. But she was gone, replaced by someone he couldn't quite predict. Finally, he exhaled and stepped back. "So what now? You gonna leave me?" Her smile returned, slow and deliberate. "If I were going to leave you, Rowan, you'd already be alone. No, I think I'll stay, for now." He frowned. "For now?" "Consider it a courtesy," she said, turning back to the coffee machine as though the conversation were over. "It gives you time to think about who you're dealing with." He didn't move for several seconds. When he finally walked out of the kitchen, she could hear the creak of the stairs under his weight, each step heavier than the last. Maeve poured herself a cup of coffee and carried it to the small desk in the corner. She opened her laptop, the glow illuminating her face as she reviewed the latest report from the investigator. More photographs, more messages, more ammunition. She didn't need to shout. She didn't need to throw him out. Not yet. The real damage wouldn't be done in this kitchen, or in the privacy of their home. It would be done where it mattered most to Rowan. In the eyes of everyone whose approval he craved. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from the PR strategist. "We've confirmed Elise is attending the Ashford Foundation dinner next week. Should we proceed?" Maeve typed back, "Absolutely." She leaned back in her chair, letting the aroma of coffee wrap around her like a slow-burning fuse. Rowan thought tonight had been the explosion, but it was only the spark. By the time the fire reached him, there would be nothing left to save. The Ashford Foundation dinner was more understated than the Whitmore Gala, but no less exclusive. Held at the historic Ashford Manor, it was the kind of event where every handshake could mean millions, and every whispered conversation had the potential to shift power in Boston. Mav arrived precisely 20 minutes after the start time, ensuring she would be noticed without seeming to try. She wore midnight blue silk, the fabric flowing around her like water, her grandmother's sapphire earrings catching the soft candlelight. This time she came alone. She didn't need an escort. Her name was enough. Across the room she spotted Rowan and Elise before they saw her. Elise wore a crimson gown that clung a little too tightly, her smile just a little too bright. Rowan was playing the part, attentive, confident, but there was a tension in his posture Maeve hadn't seen before. He was looking for her. She let them wait. Instead, she worked the room with precision, greeting donors, exchanging pleasantries with political figures, pausing for photographs with fellow board members. Every introduction included her full name, Maeve Vanderbilt. She saw the flicker of recognition in people's eyes, the way conversations shifted when she spoke. Half an hour in, she finally approached them. Rowan's face tightened. Elise's widened in surprise. "Maeve," Rowan said stiffly. "Rowan." "Elise." Maeve's tone was warm, almost friendly. "You both look comfortable." Elise straightened, sensing the subtle edge beneath the words. "We were just talking about the auction later. Rowan's bidding on a trip to the Amalfi Coast." "Oh?" Maeve smiled, tilting her head. "How generous of you, Rowan. Considering your recent financial challenges." He stiffened. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Of course you don't," she replied smoothly, before turning to Elise. "I hear congratulations are in order. Word is you're expecting an official change in your relationship soon?" Elise's painted smile faltered. Well, I don't like to gossip." "No need," Maeve said, her voice soft but cutting. "I already know." Before either could respond, the dinner bell chimed, and the guests began moving toward the long banquet tables. Maeve took her seat near the front, next to the evening's keynote speaker, a tech entrepreneur who had just signed a lucrative partnership with one of her holding companies. From her vantage point, she could see Rowan and Elise several tables back. Elise's smile was gone now, her posture rigid. The real moment came during the auction. A week earlier, Maeve had quietly arranged for a special lot to be added, a weekend getaway to the Argent, the very rooftop hotel where Rowan had proposed to Elise in secret. She had even provided the photograph for the display screen, one taken by her investigator, showing the exact moment Rowan slid the ring onto Elise's finger. The image had been cropped carefully so only their hands were visible, but the watch on Rowan's wrist was unmistakable. When the lot appeared on the screen, murmurs rippled through the room. Rowan's face drained of color. Elise stared straight ahead, frozen. "Do I hear an opening bid of 10,000? The auctioneer called. Maeve raised her paddle without hesitation. 10. Another bidder across the room joined in, and the number climbed. Rowan kept his head down, but Maeve could feel his gaze burning into her. She didn't care if she won the lot. The point had already been made. By the time the hammer fell at 15,000 to another bidder, the image was etched into the minds of half the room. During dessert, Rowan finally approached her, his voice low but laced with anger. That was deliberate. Maeve sipped her coffee. "If you mean attending the dinner, yes, I was invited. You know what I mean." Her eyes met his, calm and unflinching. "I've learned something, Rowan. If you want to hurt someone, you don't scream. You let the truth do the work for you." He gritted his teeth. "What do you want from me?" She leaned in just enough for only him to hear. "Patience, because this is just the beginning." Leaving him standing there, she returned to her seat as the final speeches began. She didn't need to look back to know he was watching her, torn between fury and fear. Across the table, one of the Ashford board members leaned over. "You know, when I heard Vanderbilt was returning to Boston, I didn't expect this." Maeve smiled faintly. Neither did he. The evening ended with polite applause and discreet goodbyes. Outside, the cold night air wrapped around her as she descended the stone steps. A sleek black car waited at the curb, Jasper's driver. She slid into the back seat, the city lights reflecting in the window. Her phone buzzed with a message from the investigator. "You're going to want to see the footage from tonight." Elise made a call after the auction. "Very interesting." Maeve's lips curved. Another piece for the file. Another step toward the inevitable. And soon, Rowan wouldn't just feel the walls closing in, he'd realize there was no way out. By Monday morning, Rowan could feel it. Something in the air at work had shifted. Conversations stopped when he entered the break room. Colleagues avoided eye contact. His assistant, usually chatty, kept her responses short and her gaze fixed on her computer. It didn't take long for him to figure out why. Someone had circulated the Ashford auction photo around the office. Even though the image didn't show Elise's face, the watch and the distinctive cufflinks Rowan wore at the event were enough for people to connect the dots. By lunch, he'd been called into his supervisor's office. "Rowan, the partners are concerned," she began carefully. "Your personal affairs are starting to reflect on the firm. We can't afford that kind of attention right now, especially with the merger talks underway." "It's just a photo," he protested. Her expression didn't change. "Optics matter. Keep it clean, or there will be consequences." He left the meeting with a pit in his stomach. For the first time, the thought that his position might not be secure crossed his mind. That evening, Elise was waiting at his apartment. She'd been spending more nights there lately, away from the house he still technically shared with Maeve. She was pacing, phone in hand. "Why didn't you tell me she was a Vanderbilt?" she demanded the moment he walked in. "I didn't know," he snapped, tossing his coat onto the couch. "She's everywhere now," Elise said, her voice rising. "The society pages, the business news, and every article calls her Maeve Vanderbilt Black. Do you know how that makes me look? Like I'm the other woman trying to steal from an heiress. That's social suicide." Rowan pinched the bridge of his nose. "It's just temporary. She's making a splash, and then it'll blow over." Elise folded her arms. "You really think she's doing this without a reason? Rowan, she's not just showing up. She's targeting us." He didn't answer, but the knot in his gut tightened. While Rowan and Elise flailed, Maeve moved with precision. Jasper had already finalized her control over the trust assets, and the PR strategist was pushing subtle narratives into the press. Articles about women reclaiming power after betrayal, about modern heiresses reshaping the business landscape. None of them named Rowan, but the timing made the implication clear to those who knew. Her next move was financial. Through her holding companies, she began quietly acquiring a competitor to Rowan's firm. She didn't need to own it outright, just enough to influence its hiring decisions. Once the deal was in place, she knew the firm's leadership would start reconsidering who they wanted on their payroll. The investigator continued to feed her a steady stream of intel. Elise had started contacting recruiters, apparently testing her options in case Rowan's situation worsened. Rowan, meanwhile, had been spotted meeting with a mid-tier investor he'd once mocked for being small-time. The desperation was becoming visible. One Thursday night, Maeve arrived home to find Rowan waiting in the living room. He looked tired, his tie loosened, his hair slightly disheveled. "We need to talk," he said. She set her purse down. "About what?" "About whatever this is you're doing. The galas, the dinners, the press. You're trying to make me look bad." She tilted her head, regarding him as if he'd just confessed to something trivial. "Rowan, you're doing that all by yourself." His jaw tightened. "You don't have to destroy me." Her voice was calm, almost gentle. "Don't I? After what you've done?" He ran a hand through his hair. "Look, I made mistakes, but I still care about you." She cut him off with a quiet laugh. "Care? You care about losing. That's all this is to you." The silence between them stretched, heavy with things unsaid. Finally, Rowan spoke again. "If you want a divorce, just say it." Maeve's smile was faint, almost pitying. "A divorce would be too easy for you." That night, Rowan lay awake, staring at the ceiling, while Maeve slept soundly in the guest room. He didn't know that the next morning, an announcement would go out in the business press. Vanderbilt Holdings acquires controlling interest in Stonewall Capital. To most readers, it was just another deal. To Rowan, it was the beginning of the end. Stonewall Capital was the firm's biggest rival, and everyone knew the two companies didn't play nice. By the time he got to the office, the whispers had turned into open stares. One colleague even muttered, "Guess we know whose side she's on," as he passed. Back at home, Maeve reviewed the final seating chart for the upcoming Boston Philanthropy Summit. Rowan and Elise were both on the guest list, invited by a mutual contact who had no idea what was coming. Maeve smiled to herself. The summit would be the perfect place for the final blow, and this time there would be no doubt about who was pulling the strings. The Boston Philanthropy Summit, was an annual convergence of the city's wealthiest, most influential, and most ambitious. Held in the glass-walled atrium of the Harborview Center, it overlooked the glittering harbor like a stage set for power plays. Maeve arrived early, not to mingle, but to prepare. She knew exactly where Rowan and Elise would be seated. She'd made sure of it. The table assignments placed them directly across from the main podium, with no way to avoid seeing her every time she spoke. She chose her attire with surgical precision, a white tailored suit with clean, sharp lines, the kind that projected both authority and control. Around her neck rested the sapphire pendant that had belonged to her mother, instantly recognizable to anyone who knew the Vanderbilt family. Rowan and Elise arrived just after the first hour. Elise wore a glittering silver dress that looked more nightclub than charity event. Rowan's suit was immaculate, but his expression betrayed the strain of the past few weeks. He scanned the room and froze when he spotted Maeve at the head table. She didn't look at him right away. Instead, she greeted other guests, spoke with organizers, and signed a few documents for the silent auction. Only when she felt his gaze burning into her did she finally meet his eyes. A single glance, cool and unbothered, before turning back to her conversation. The morning sessions passed uneventfully. Rowan and Elise kept their heads down, though Maeve noticed Elise's restless shifting, the way her smile wavered when introduced to certain guests. Word traveled fast in Boston's social circles, and Maeve had made sure the right people knew enough about Elise's ambitions to keep their distance. After lunch, it was time for the panel discussion on ethics and philanthropy. Maeve was the final speaker. She took the stage without notes, her voice carrying effortlessly across the glass atrium. "We talk about generosity," she began, "as if it's simply the act of giving. But true generosity is about integrity, about aligning our public actions with our private behavior. When those two are out of sync, trust is lost, and once trust is gone, no amount of money can buy it back." She let the words hang for a moment, her gaze sweeping the room. "In my own life," she continued, "I've seen how betrayal doesn't just wound the person it's aimed at. It ripples outward, damaging reputations, partnerships, and entire communities. That's why tonight's focus isn't just on giving, but on accountability." The silence was palpable. At one of the back tables, a journalist scribbled furiously. Cameras clicked. Then came the moment she had planned for. "Sometimes," she said, "those who present themselves as worthy partners in public are in private, undermining the very trust they claim to uphold." As she spoke, the large projection screen behind her lit up, not with slides, but with a short video. It began with a blurred clip of Rowan and Elise at the Argent rooftop, Rowan slipping the ring onto her finger. The camera angle was discreet but unmistakable. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Maeve didn't look back at the screen. She didn't need to. She kept speaking as if the footage were simply an illustration of her point. When deception is exposed, it's not just a personal failure, it's a public one. And those who build on dishonesty will always see their foundations collapse. The video ended, replaced by the event's logo. The applause that followed was polite, but tinged with an electric tension. Everyone in the room understood the message and the target. Rowan sat frozen, his face a mask of forced composure. Elise's lips were pressed into a thin line, her eyes darting toward the exit. When the panel concluded, guests began murmuring, some glancing openly at Rowan and Elise. Maeve stepped down from the stage, accepting handshakes and congratulations from the organizers. She could feel the shift in the room. Rowan was no longer the charming financial up-and-comer. He was the man caught in the wrong story, at the wrong time, with the wrong woman. Rowan finally approached her, near the refreshment table. His voice was low but trembling with anger. "That was low." She sipped her water. It was honest. "You're trying to destroy me in front of everyone I know." She met his gaze, unblinking. "Rowan, I'm not trying. I'm succeeding." Before he could reply, Elise grabbed his arm. "We're leaving," she said through clenched teeth. They left without saying goodbye to anyone. Conversations followed them out the door like a trail of smoke. Maeve stayed until the end, chatting with donors, securing pledges for the foundation she was relaunching under her own name. By the time she stepped outside, the winter sun was low over the harbor, casting the water in shades of gold. Her phone buzzed. A message from Jasper. Stonewall Capital is moving forward with the hiring freeze. Your rival's board just made it official. Maeve smiled faintly. Rowan had no idea yet, but the damage to his career was about to turn permanent, and when he found out, it would be far too late to save anything, or anyone. The call came on a Wednesday morning. Rowan had been sitting at his desk, staring at a spreadsheet he couldn't focus on, when his supervisor's voice summoned him to the boardroom. The partners were waiting, every one of them, seated in a row like a tribunal. "We've reviewed recent events," the senior partner began, her tone clipped. "Between the merger complications and the optics issues from your personal life, we've concluded it's best to part ways." Rowan's pulse spiked. "You're firing me?" "Your contract will be honored," she said, sliding a folder across the table. "But effective immediately, your role here is terminated." He wanted to argue, to plead, but the looks on their faces told him it wouldn't matter. He was escorted out by security before lunch. By the time he reached his apartment, Elise was packing. "Where are you going?" he demanded. She didn't even pause, folding a sequined dress into her suitcase. "You think I'm gonna stick around for this? Everyone's talking, Rowan. I'm being frozen out of every circle I've worked to get into. And now you've lost your job." "I can fix this," he insisted, though the words rang hollow even to him. She laughed, a short, bitter sound. "You can't fix this. She's dismantling you piece by piece, and you don't even know how deep it goes." "Elise, don't." She zipped her suitcase. "Call me when you're not a sinking ship." She was gone within the hour. For the rest of the day, Rowan sat in silence, the weight of everything pressing down on him. The phone calls from friends stopped. Emails went unanswered. Even his social media accounts were a graveyard of past boasts and unreturned messages. That evening, there was a knock at the door. When he opened it, Maeve was standing there, dressed in a simple black coat, her expression unreadable. "Can I come in?" she asked. He stepped aside, unsure what else to do. She walked in slowly, her gaze sweeping the apartment, the expensive furniture, the empty champagne bottles, the half-packed boxes. "You've been busy," she said softly. "Why are you here?" His voice was rough. "To tell you something." She turned to face him fully. "Everything that's happened, the gala, the dinner, the summit, that was just me pulling back the curtain. The rest, you did to yourself." His jaw tightened. "You planned all of this." "I prepared for it," she corrected. "The moment I saw you at that wine bar with her, I knew the man I thought I married didn't exist, so I stopped protecting you." Rowan's hands curled into fists at his sides. "You could have just left." She shook her head. "Leaving would have been a gift. You didn't deserve one." He took a step toward her. "You wanted to ruin me." "No," she said, her voice low and precise. "I wanted you to understand that when you betray someone who gave you everything, the cost is everything you have left." The silence between them was heavy, filled with all the things he couldn't say, apologies he didn't believe in, excuses she wouldn't accept. Finally, she reached into her bag and pulled out an envelope. She set it on the counter. "That's your severance from the trust accounts. I'm cutting you off completely. Consider it the last payment you'll ever get from me." He stared at the envelope but didn't touch it. "What am I supposed to do now?" She met his eyes. "Survive or don't. Either way, it's not my problem anymore." With that, she turned and walked to the door. "Maeve," he called after her. She paused, her hand on the knob. "I never thought you'd do this to me," he said, his voice breaking just slightly. She looked over her shoulder. "That's because you never thought I could." The door closed behind her with a soft click, leaving him in the dim, silent apartment. That night, Rowan scrolled through his phone until he reached an old photo. The two of them on their wedding day, smiling, unaware of the future. He stared at it until the screen dimmed, the room around him shrinking into darkness. Across the city, Maeve sat in her penthouse office, reviewing the final documents for the new Vanderbilt Foundation launch. Her name was back where it belonged, and her reputation stronger than ever. The people who mattered knew her story now, and they knew she had the strength to protect herself. But she wasn't done yet. There was one final stage left, a public event that would cement her return and leave Rowan with nothing but the memory of what he'd lost. And when that night came, she would make sure it was unforgettable. 2 months later, Boston's most anticipated event of the season arrived, the Vanderbilt Foundation's relaunch gala. Invitations had been coveted for weeks, with only the city's most influential figures making the guest list. It was to be held at the historic Langston Hall, a venue reserved for the kind of moments that would be talked about for decades. For Maeve, it was more than just a gala. It was the full restoration of her place in the world, on her own terms, in her own name. Every detail had been planned with precision, from the champagne imported from her family's vineyards in France to the centerpiece orchids flown in that morning. She arrived early, stepping into the grand ballroom in a floor-length gown of deep gold, a color that radiated strength and warmth. The sapphire pendant rested against her collarbone, gleaming under the chandeliers. She moved through the final checks with her team, calm but electric inside. Tonight was her night. Guests began arriving, the flash of cameras greeting each one. Politicians, CEOs, philanthropists, and old money families streamed through the entrance, eager to be seen in attendance. Maeve welcomed them with genuine warmth, introducing partners for the foundation's new initiatives. The press was everywhere, capturing the faces, the laughter, the clinking glasses. And then, almost predictably, Rowan appeared. He wasn't on the guest list, but he'd found a way in, probably through some desperate contact who owed him a favor. He wore a dark suit that didn't quite fit as well as it used to, and there was an edge of desperation in his eyes. He approached while she was speaking with the mayor. "Maeve, can we talk?" She didn't break her smile, simply excusing herself from the conversation. "You shouldn't be here, Rowan. I just need a minute." She studied him for a moment. 1 minute. They stepped to a quieter corner of the ballroom, the music and chatter still a soft hum around them. "I've been thinking," he began, his voice low. "I made mistakes, I know that, but maybe we could start over." Her expression didn't change. "Rowan, you didn't just break a promise. You broke the foundation of trust we stood on. And when it crumbled, you thought you could just build again on the same ground. You can't." He swallowed. "I've lost everything." "That was your choice," she said simply. Before he could answer, the event coordinator approached. "Ms. Vanderbilt, we're ready for your speech." She turned back to Rowan. "Enjoy the rest of your evening," from the sidelines. She walked to the stage as applause broke out. The ballroom lights softened, a single spotlight illuminating her as she stepped to the podium. "Good evening," she began, her voice carrying with quiet authority. "Tonight is about more than the relaunch of a foundation. It's about resilience, about reclaiming your voice when others have tried to take it from you." She spoke of the foundation's projects, education programs, women's entrepreneurship grants, community revitalization efforts. But woven through her words was a deeper message, one the crowd could feel. "There was a time," she said, "when I believed that love meant hiding parts of yourself to make someone else feel bigger. I was wrong. True partnership is not about dimming your light for someone else's comfort. It's about shining together and knowing that if someone can't stand in that light with you, they have no place in your future." The applause swelled, filling the ballroom like a wave. Cameras flashed. In the corner, Rowan stood still, his face unreadable, as the crowd rose to its feet for her standing ovation. When the speech ended, Maeve stepped down into a sea of congratulations. Deals were discussed, pledges made, photographs taken. Her name, Maeve Vanderbilt, was on everyone's lips, no longer hidden, no longer tied to anyone but herself. By midnight, the ballroom was a swirl of music and laughter. Maeve stood on the balcony overlooking the harbor, the city lights glittering below. Jasper joined her, handing her a glass of champagne. "It's done," he said simply. She nodded. "It's just the beginning." They clinked glasses. She took a slow sip, feeling the cool air on her skin, the hum of satisfaction in her chest. Somewhere behind her, Rowan had already left. His exit hadn't been noticed, and that was the final truth. He was no longer part of her story. Maeve smiled to herself, her gaze fixed on the horizon. Because this wasn't just revenge, it was rebirth. So that's it, my friends. Our story has come full circle. And if you're still here with me right now, watching until the very end, I believe something in this journey has touched your heart in a way you didn't expect. Maybe it stirred a memory. Maybe it mirrored something you've been through. Or maybe it simply reminded you of the strength you already carry inside. You see, this wasn't just a story about betrayal and revenge. It was a story about resilience, about choosing not to let someone else's actions define your worth. The ancient Stoic philosopher Epictetus once said, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." Maeve could have been broken, but instead she chose to rebuild. Not for him, but for herself. There's another line from Marcus Aurelius I think about often. The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury. That's exactly what we saw here. She didn't sink to Rowan's level. She rose above it, reclaiming her life with dignity, power, and grace. And maybe that's the real takeaway for you and me. We can't always control what people do to us, but we can always choose our response. We can choose to heal, to grow, to stand taller than before. And in doing so, we become untouchable. So if you're going through something right now, heartbreak, betrayal, loss, remember, you are stronger than you think. The pain you feel now is not the end of your story. It's the beginning of your comeback. If this journey moved you even a little, I'd love for you to like, share, and subscribe so we can keep telling stories that speak to the heart. Because somewhere out there, someone needs to hear this next chapter. And maybe, just maybe, it's exactly the hope they've been waiting for.